Icon share. Stop. Button. 16 drive me crazy. Console mic switch off. On.
Change your heart. Look around you. Change your heart. It will astound you. I need your loving.
Console mic switch off.
Right, I understand that, obviously everybody's asking about the Ministry of All Things and the Ministry of Problems, and
WhatsApp.
this is all like imaginary stuff that's happening. But people are asking me about, what I think, and I interviewed Tim for one of our shows, and he basically said, that there's an arrest following a secret spacecraft, and it's all been top secret, but the arrest has been made and it's been following up. Now, I read today that apparently there has been multiple alien attacks and there's been a blog on the internet which you can follow, an imaginary blog which doesn't exist, and it's about what the ministry's doing about this World in Between Worlds document, and they're basically talking about radio hacks and how people have been hacking radios to talk to the dead, tricking the brain, and apparently they managed to get the ghosts into the ministry, and they were solving one problem by modding a radio so it could tune really, really fast so they could speak to ghosts. And also, do you remember we interviewed Tim years ago and he spoke about apparently in the Ministry of All Things, the minister had a Ouija board brought to him on his desk. Well, that's also in the blog as well. The minister had his own Ouija board. The Minister of All Things, who's now one of the judges of the panel, he stepped down quite a few years ago, is one of the judges of the panel. And guess what? He still has the same Ouija board on his desk, ladies and gentlemen. But there's also a copy of the Ouija board in the documents. And there's also reports, there's newspaper reports, of famous newspaper reports of an alien possession. Someone got an alien possession in the ministry, and there is documents of that also that's been printed. And a brand new online report has state that it's possible of an alien possession, because there's a guy in London at his home, and he said there was a vehicle that was parked outside of his home, and the vehicle got closer and closer and closer, and it got to his window, and they didn't crash through his window, but when he went to his window, he saw the lights and they were blinding his eyes. He had to cover his eyes, he had to turn away, and he was thrown to his knees. He didn't just get on his knees, he was thrown to his knees. Then what happened next was he felt the room vibrating very violently. Everything all shuddered at once. And then he felt like he was being raped. course, the reports don't state that he felt like he was being raped, but apparently the ministry reports that's been released online state that he felt like he was being raped. The newspaper report version also doesn't describe the lights that were blinding that came through the window. Also, his head felt like it was being pulled apart, and his brain ached. He felt like his brain was about to internally bleed. He had a violent, aggressive headache, and all experienced next as everything shuddered. He felt like everything was going to take off, and he heard voices from nowhere. Now, this explains something quite spiritual. And obviously the reports go further to say these beings were absolutely from nowhere. The guy was able to fight the aliens from him, and he managed to call the military within seconds. Unfortunately, the ministry did not respond till 48 hours. By this point, the man was possessed by the aliens. He was talking in their language, he was behaving in their manner, and it was almost like he was being used as a puppet. Now, this guy has actually been revived. This guy's actually been revived in the Ministry of All Things. Apparently,
Gmail. Now, Spreaker, you've exceeded your audio storage limits. Upgrade your account before you lose your content. You've exceeded your audio storage limits. Hi, Stephen Ball.
Yeah.
You're doing great, and we're excited to see you're enjoying chat. Button. Stop.
so basically, that's what happened. The guy then they got him to a hospital. They got him to a mental hospital wing, and the mental hospital couldn't treat him.
Now, Temper Thursday Night Import 1. Episode is now ready to be shared. Notification. Studio.
So,
Now, Temper Thursday Night Import
what happened was the guy was imported to hospital, and they couldn't treat him for drugs in the end. And then what happened next was they managed to treat him, and what they did was they did a lobotomy. They managed to put probes in his brain. They managed to put electrodes in, and there's a document from the Ministry of All Things saying the amount of consent that went through from doctors, because the man could not consent of his own will, because he was behaving in a strange manner. They had to put him in a special chamber. They had to put him in a special chamber. They had to restrain him, and then they attached him to machines where they drilled a hole through his. They tied him to a wall with chains, and then they put a needle in him, and then they basically drilled a hole in the skull and put electrodes in the brain, and basically they did they did two things. First of all, they did an ECT. And then once they'd done an ECT, they then injected probes into the brain. Now this had to be authorized by doctors, the Ministry of All Things, the military, the Ministry of Defence, and this also had to be authorized by doctors, the top people. There was thousands of people. There was lots and lots of documents that were signed, and then they had to put a magnet to this guy's head while these electrodes were being formed. So they just kept shocking the brain. And apparently, when they were drilling a hole in the skull, they saw something slimy ooze out. It was like a parasite. They had to destroy this worm-type creature within the brain. When the guy came to and whatever, he vomited really, really violently. And then he was sent to a ward and he was absolutely fine and doesn't remember anything that happened. Of course, he feels traumatized by the whole incident, but now he's written, he wrote to the ministry and has asked for his documents to be released to the papers. So that's where you can find all the documents. They're all online. And that's where they all are.
Console mic switch off. 6 Jesus built my hot rope. 15 everyday mic play. Button. Button. Mic. 6G. 7 Ghost of Brian Jones. M4A. Mic. 6 Jesus built. 7 mic. Auto. Button mic. 6 Jesus. 1 let it go. 15 everyday mic. Pause. Button. 7 Ghost of Brian. Stop. Button.